Hey guys, tonight we slip back into the smoke-soaked haze of a medieval courtyard where something delicious, or potentially dangerous, is already being skewered over a roaring fire. You're not a guest here yet, you're just drifting in, curious, your boots squelching slightly in the damp grass. The sun's barely up, but the kitchen yard behind this stone fortress is already a bubbling chaos of steam, smoke, barking dogs, and a cook who definitely does not have time to explain why he's stuffing a goose with garlic and grapes. You hear chickens squawking in a panic, a boy chasing one with a cleaver, and the slow, rhythmic clang of cleavers hitting wood as morning prep begins for what promises to be an epic medieval banquet. This isn't just dinner. This is the event of the season. A royal visit, a noble's wedding, or maybe just the local baron showing off again. Whatever the excuse, you can tell it's going to be excessive, a little unhinged, and probably not great for your digestion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The courtyard is alive with motion. Carcasses hang from hooks, herbs dangle from rafters, and the air smells like wood smoke, raw meat, and onions that have been sliced aggressively. You nearly trip over a terrier who is very intent on stealing something from the chopping block. A huge iron pot, wide enough to bathe in, is already bubbling with what might be a pottage or just an elaborate way to disguise leftovers from 3 days ago. No one here is wearing chef whites. Instead, it's rough-spun tunics, stained aprons, and caps that don't do much to contain the chaos. This is a medieval kitchen, and it's not for the faint of heart. There's shouting in Latin, English, and something that might be Norman French, and it all blends into the background noise of a feast being born. A man you assume is the head cook, judging by his volume and his complete indifference to a burn blossoming on his forearm, waves his knife in a circle and barks something about the trout going in after the pike, not with. You learn very quickly that the order of cooking things is deeply political. Peacocks, swans, and boars will get the showiest treatment, but first, someone's got to pluck, gut, and spit them. A young girl walks by balancing a tray of eel pies like it's no big deal. She's maybe 12, and judging by the practiced tilt of her wrist, this is not her first feast. She's also the first person today to look you in the eye and smile. "You'll want to stay away from the pie with the red string," she says quietly. "Unless you want to spend tomorrow in the bushes." You nod, as if you know exactly what that means. You do not. By now the minstrels have arrived. They're tuning their fiddles and lutes just outside the hall. One of them has a hurdy-gurdy, which is kind of like if a violin and a crank-operated music box had a medieval baby. It's both charming and incredibly annoying. The musicians are not part of the cooking crew, but they know the drill. They'll need to coordinate with the feast progress, cueing songs between courses and trying not to get beaned by a flying chicken bone. At the far end of the courtyard, a pig is being led reluctantly toward a spit. It seems to know what's coming, and it's making an absolutely operatic fuss about it. Two boys are struggling to keep it from bolting, and you're honestly rooting for the pig. Now here's something you might not expect. This entire feast has likely been planned for weeks, if not months, by a steward or seneschal. This guy is basically a medieval event planner with authority and anxiety in equal measure. He's the one pacing near the storage shed now, holding a parchment list that's so long it's brushing the muddy ground. He's muttering to himself, checking off barrels of ale, joints of venison, and, yes, candied fennel for the upper table. Medieval banquets were not thrown together casually. They were orchestrated, theatrical, and strategic. A single feast could reinforce a king's power, honor visiting nobles, or, occasionally, outdo a rival who had thrown a slightly more extravagant one last year. And because everything was symbolic, the food often served as propaganda. Peacocks roasted and redressed in their own feathers weren't just food, they were flexes. Now, here's your reality check. If you were anyone other than a guest or servant, you'd be helping skin a hare, shelling 300 walnuts, or plucking swan feathers while someone screamed about presentation. And if you happen to be a peasant, you'd be outside the walls, maybe watching the smoke and wondering what roast boar tastes like. You probably won't survive this era with your intestines intact. And yet, there's something mesmerizing here. The firelight flickers against stone. The cooks move with chaotic precision, and even the geese flapping overhead seem to sense something festive. The musicians break into a practice melody, light, quick, and a bit crooked like the floorboards in this castle. A fringe fact for your brain to chew on while the duck roasts. At some banquets, especially during the height of the Tudor period, they would serve dishes in disguise like meat shaped to look like fruit, or pies filled with live birds that would fly out when sliced. Historians still argue whether this was meant to impress, horrify, or just provide material for the medieval equivalent of TikTok. Back near the ovens, a massive fish has arrived. It's barely dead and still looks like it might swim away if no one's watching. The cook calls it a sturgeon, and it's probably been dragged in from some noble's private pond, just for tonight. It will likely be boiled, skinned, stuffed with spices, and then glazed until it looks more like a piece of art than a creature that once swam. There's something almost rhythmic to it now. The pounding of cleavers, the bubbling of pots, the rising drone of lute strings warming up. It's not peaceful exactly, but it is a kind of preparation ritual. You feel the feast beginning to take shape. Somewhere inside the castle, candles are being lit. Trenchers, stale bread plates are stacked. Tables are being scrubbed down. And a heavy door creaks open, inviting you into the warmth and madness of what comes next. One last glance back at the courtyard, where the air now smells of garlic, rosemary, and something sweet. Maybe a spiced fruit compote that'll be served between courses. You take a breath, step forward, and let the heavy wooden doors shut behind you. The first thing that hits you inside the hall isn't the flicker of candlelight or the vaulted stone ceilings, it's the smell. Sweet almond paste mingles with roasted meat, sharp vinegar glazes, and something buttery, sugary, spicy that might be a saffron pear tart, cooling on a window ledge. It's rich, heady, and just a little overwhelming. You haven't even made it to the table yet, and already your stomach is staging a coup. A long trestle table stretches down the center of the hall, and another runs along the raised platform at the far end. That one's for the high table reserved for the host, honored guests, and anyone important enough to warrant silver cutlery and actual napkins. Which, let's be real, are just bits of embroidered linen that nobody here actually uses. You don't get to sit there, no offense. Servants are everywhere. Young boys carrying trays of puff pastry swans, girls with pitchers of hippocras, a sweet spiced wine, and older stewards overseeing it all like hawks in aprons. And at the center of the whirlwind, the food. Peacocks, actual peacocks, will have arrived. Roasted, then redressed in their own iridescent feathers with gilded beaks and little wire stands to hold their necks just so. They don't look edible. They look like mythical creatures on break from a medieval tapestry. One has a sprig of rosemary in its mouth, like it's attending its own funeral with grace. Nearby, someone is assembling a meat pie the size of a toddler. It smells incredible. But what they're doing with it? Even better. See, medieval chefs were showmen. This pie isn't just filled with spiced pork and veal. It has a surprise inside. A second smaller pie with minced eel and almond, and under that, a layer of live songbirds. Yep. When the pie is cut open, the birds will fly out. The guests will gasp. The host will grin. The birds presumably will seek therapy. This dish is called a bake meat, and it's not a one-off. You see pigs shaped like hedgehogs, fish that are actually birds, and marzipan sculptures of castles that are technically edible, but mostly just flexes of wealth and labor. Historians still argue whether these edible illusions were meant to entertain or to demonstrate terrifying levels of power. Look what I can make my servants do in their spare time. Another dish arrives, cradled in the arms of two sweaty footmen like a newborn. A boar's head, gilded, its tusks polished to an ivory sheen, with a lemon in its mouth and cloves studded into its snout like piercings. A small flag bearing the host's sigil is jammed into its scalp. You stare at it, unsure if you're supposed to eat it, praise it, or run from it. Probably all three. The bread here isn't just bread. It's often dyed with saffron or beetroot, shaped into knots, braids, or miniature towers. Trenchers, the edible plates, are made from yesterday's stale loaves, cut thick and flat. They'll soak up all the sauces, meat juices, and crumbs during the meal. If you're fancy, you'll get a fresh trencher each course. If not, well, hopefully the one from round one doesn't go too soggy. Now, something odd. A jiggling thing approaches. It's clear, glistening, and holding something inside. You're witnessing the birth of medieval gelatin. Aspic. They've boiled bones, cooled the broth, and trapped a hard-boiled egg and parsley leaves inside it like they're building a meat-flavored snow globe. It's horrifying and fascinating. You take a cautious step toward what looks like a delicate tart, only to learn it's filled with lamprey, a jawless, blood-sucking fish considered a delicacy. It's wrapped in flaky crust, glazed with honey, and you find yourself strangely tempted. Historians still debate whether medieval people genuinely enjoyed these dishes or simply tolerated them for the sake of fashion and rank. Kind of like us with oat milk lattes. Next up, colored butter sculptures. Someone's shaped a knight slaying a dragon out of butter. It's melting slightly. The symbolism is strong, but the structural integrity is questionable. Oh, and over at the dessert table, because yes, they had dessert, you see sugar plate creations. These are edible sculptures made from sugar paste, molded into flowers, castles, even mini-saints. The more intricate, the better. And if you think that's extreme, one noble family once served a sugar cathedral complete with stained glass windows made from boiled syrup. Guests ate it like it was a piñata from heaven. Then there's lèche lambarde, a slab of meat stewed in wine, cut into geometric patterns and spiced with cinnamon and cloves. It's rich, intense, and slightly confusing. Every bite is a different temperature, so you're not sure how. Nearby, a monk in attendance raises an eyebrow at the wine-spiced hare served with cherries. "Too French," he mutters. You pretend not to hear. But he has a point. Culinary trends shifted fast, and what was fashionable in Burgundy last month might already be passé in York. There's a deep class dynamic baked into the bread here, too. Nobles got saffron, almonds, and sugar. Luxuries imported at great expense. The lower tables, more turnips and cabbage. Always cabbage. Fringe tidbit. There were entire guidebooks on how to carve meats at the table with flair. Elbows out, blade tilted. Always with a flourish. The best carvers were like influencers of the meat world. Some even had names recorded in history, like John Russell, who literally wrote The Boke of Nurture and described how to slice a pheasant while making it look like it flew onto your plate. A bit overwhelmed, you slip back toward the kitchen for air, only to see a tray of jelly eels slide past. You reconsider. Maybe the air inside is better. Despite how surreal this all is, it's not a one-time thing. The medieval upper crust often hosted dozens of banquets a year. Some feasts lasted days. Literal days, with rotating menus, sleeping benches, and stomachs pushed well past capacity. Feasts weren't just celebrations, they were displays of influence, identity, even religious devotion. They were political armor dipped in gravy. One cook drops a roast capon. A small dog snatches it and vanishes under a table. The cook does not follow. You lock eyes across the room. It's fine. It's all fine. And here's your final image before you move into the hall itself. A line of pies shaped like castles, smoke piped through hollow pastry chimneys, guarded by sugar knights holding almond swords. It's absurd. It's brilliant. It's a medieval fever dream with a crust, and this is just the menu. You haven't even sat down yet. You finally step into the Great Hall proper, and it's like walking into the belly of a theatrical beast. The ceiling soars impossibly high overhead, vanishing into timbered shadows laced with smoke. Tapestries hang thick on the walls, woven stories of saints, hunts, and battles, where everyone seems either nobly doomed or suspiciously handsome. If they help keep the cold out, great. But let's be honest, they're also a medieval version of a flex wall. The floor is layered with rushes, dry straw or herbs, scattered not just for insulation but to soak up spilled wine, grease, or worse. Some halls even mix in dried lavender or mint, giving the place a subtle perfume. If you squint your nose past the roasted meat, tallow candles, and ode to slightly damp noblemen. The long tables are already groaning under the weight of silver platters, glazed trenchers, ornate goblets, and bread sculptures shaped like swans mid-squawk. The tablecloths, where they exist, are crisp white linen, but don't get too attached. They won't stay white for long. A single course can last hours. And a full banquet? Well, cancel tomorrow. You drift toward the lower end of one table. Don't get ideas about sitting near the host unless you enjoy social ruin. And settle into a creaky bench. Across from you sits a merchant, overdressed and underwhelmed. His rings say wealthy, but his cheese-sweaty forehead says not quite noble. You two will probably bond over boiled carrots later. Suddenly the trumpets blare. Not a metaphor. Actual trumpets. Probably someone's kid cousin learning the ropes. The sound blasts through the hall, like a goose trapped in a tuba. It's the cue. The feast is about to officially begin. All heads turn to the high table on the raised dais. There, the host enters, not striding, but floating, thanks to two perfectly rehearsed servants holding their cloak just so. The guests rise. The host gives a modest nod, possibly calculating which cousin is most likely to start a food fight by course 4. Then the seating begins, and hoo boy, it's not casual. You're seated based on rank, gender, proximity to the host, and possibly how many turnips your family donated last winter. Seating is political theater, not logistics. Sit in the wrong spot, and you're either demoted to the floor or the scandal of the season. Historians still argue whether the seating was always this rigid, or whether it flexed a bit based on who was marrying whom, who owed whom a favor, and whether the bishop had already claimed a corner near the fire. But in general, know your place, or fake confidence and pray. The high table is where the real drama simmers. Lords and ladies arranged like a row of jeweled statues, each one pretending they aren't sizing each other up between sips of mead. A bishop coughs. A duchess fans herself with an expression that suggests she's both hot and bored, and in the very center, the host raises a goblet for the first toast. Here comes your first medieval reality check of the evening. You don't get to eat yet. Nope. First comes ritual. Blessings. Maybe a Latin prayer if things are extra formal. Possibly a reading of titles that goes on so long it causes minor existential crises. If you were expecting a quick bite before the entertainment, sorry, you're in for a performance of peacocks, pride, and performative piety. Someone from the kitchens brings out a dish that isn't food. It's a centerpiece. A roast boar with an apple in its mouth, trailing garlands of rosemary and what looks like a diorama of a small village carved into lard. Everyone gasps. You squint. Is that moving? Another servant, this one wearing tights so aggressively yellow they should be illegal, comes down the hall juggling apples and reciting something that might be poetry. Or a shopping list. No one's really sure. The tension in the hall isn't just anticipation, it's hierarchy in action. Everything, from when you eat to how loudly you laugh, is determined by your place on the invisible ladder of medieval society. The higher the seat, the better the dish. The lower the rank? Hope you like stewed lentils. The hall's lighting is doing something strange to your senses. The glow from the candles bounces off polished goblets, reflecting little pools of gold across the tables. Shadows dance on the stone walls, flickering like medieval ghosts half remembered from songs. Someone starts a slow strum on a lute. You feel like you're inside a painting that smells like ham. a fringe detail for you. In the more lavish halls, sometimes the tables weren't just wood. They were painted with checkerboard patterns or ringed with painted borders. Not because anyone played board games on them, but because they looked fancier. In some cases, the tables were even scrubbed down with sand and ale to disinfect them between feasts. Sanitary. Scented. Kinda. You hear a hiss near your feet. Turns out you've been joined by a cat. It's helping itself to a bit of fish that fell from the table behind you. No one seems to mind. Animals in the hall are common. Cats for rats, dogs for scraps, and the occasional falcon because some people just had to bring their emotional support bird. Suddenly, a hush falls across the room. A squire in too big armor has just tripped over a candlestick, nearly taking down an entire roast goose in the process. He rights himself with all the grace of a sack of wet flour. The guests murmur politely. The goose survives. Barely. The servers begin distributing the first course. It's a slow, measured parade. Each dish is carried with the pomp of sacred relics. The plates clink down. Steam rises. You smell cloves, cinnamon, roasted shallots, and meat that's been glazed until it glistens like a holy artifact. And yet, you're not allowed to just dive in. The carver steps forward, one per table, usually a young noble learning how not to mess it up in public. He slices with precision, passing portions to the highest-ranking guest at the table first. You get yours dead last, and it's a suspiciously small piece of something brown. You eat with your fingers mostly. Knives are personal items carried on your belt, and forks? Exotic. Suspicious. Some clergy even call them devil's tines. Most people just use bread as a scoop, their hands or gravity. The result is messy. By the time the second course arrives, something involving rabbit, grapes, and a custard that might be alive, you're starting to appreciate the artistry, even if your stomach isn't sure what century it belongs in anymore. Above you, a minstrel has taken to singing a ballad about a knight who falls in love with a mermaid and drowns before consummating anything. Everyone nods politely. The Duchess dabs her eye. You notice her napkin is made of lace finer than anything you've ever touched. And just when you think the scene can't get more surreal, a small troop of children dressed as woodland creatures comes in, carrying tarts shaped like roses. One of them is clearly picking his nose. Another is singing off key, but the crowd loves it. It's adorable, chaotic, and entirely normal. Somewhere behind the dais you hear shouting. A kitchen boy's dropped a tray, again. A plate shatters, a dog barks, someone laughs. The lute player keeps strumming, oblivious. You lean back on the bench stuffed with mystery meat, watching the candlelight tremble on your goblet. You realize something strange. This chaos, this formality, this pageantry, it all works. It feels like something important is happening. And maybe it is, or maybe it's just dinner with extra steps. You don't realize how political a chair can be until you watch a knight nearly dislocate his spine trying to not sit before a baron does. The pecking order at this feast is tighter than the laces on the chamberlain's doublet, and every inch you scoot up or down the bench says something about your status, your alliances, or how recently you offended someone's great aunt. At the high table, things look serene. Goblets raised in toast, veils fluttering gently in the warmth of the hall. But that's a lie. A calculated lie, because just below the surface it's all ego, old debts, marital jockeying, and extremely subtle beef. You can practically smell the tension between the Earl of something or other and Lady What's Her Title. One of them has been served a bigger slice of game pie, this will be remembered. And seating, it's everything. There's a reason the phrase, above the salt, exists. Salt was precious, set right in the middle of the high table. Sit above it, toward the host, you're somebody. Sit below it, nearer the servants, well, enjoy your boiled turnips and limited eye contact. You glance down your own table and spot the subtle rankings. That guy with the enormous hat? He's a knight's cousin. That woman in pearls? She married up. The old man with the stained sleeves and 2 spoons in his belt? He's not even supposed to be here. Probably snuck in. Honestly, respect. Historians still argue how much flexibility there really was in seating. In some courts, it was codified, written down, and enforced. In others, it was vibes, favors, and who could whisper the right thing to the steward. But regardless, the outcome was the same. You knew where you stood by where you sat, and everyone else knew it too. What's wild is how aware everyone is of their own position. No one eats until the highest-ranking guest does. No one drinks until the host raises their goblet. It's like synchronized snacking. You reach for your trencher too soon and suddenly, you're the subject of a roastier-than-the-duck gossip spiral. You overhear a minor, noble whispering about being seated one place farther from the dais than last year. A deliberate insult, he hisses to his wife. They want to shame me. His wife, who looks like she'd rather be literally anywhere else, nods and sips her wine. You don't blame her. There are whispers about someone at the high table being a last-minute addition. Maybe a favor, maybe blackmail, maybe the host is trying to impress someone. Maybe they're trying to punish someone by seating them next to a particular in-law. It's dinner as warfare. The food just happens to be collateral. Still, the hall is mesmerizing. You can't help but keep glancing up. Above the tables, banners hang like silent spectators. Each one tells a story. Family crests, past victories, claims to land or virtue. Some are old and fraying, others are new. Vibrant declarations of newly risen houses. It's like sitting beneath a forest of flexing ancestors. You spot a man seated alone near a side pillar. No one talks to him. His robe is clean but plain, his knife unadorned. You wonder if he's a monk, or maybe a disgraced lord. Someone nudges you and mutters, "That's the one who challenged Lord DeVere to a duel over a duck." You nod slowly. You'll get that full story later. Then there's the clergy. A few monks, a bishop, maybe a canon or two. They sit close to the dais, fork still considered suspiciously decadent by some of them. One monk is aggressively rearranging his lentils into a tiny map of Jerusalem. Another is already 3 goblets deep and humming what might be a hymn or a drinking song. At some tables, guests eat from a shared platter. At others, they have their own plates, depending on status. You, of course, are in the hope the person next to you doesn't double dip section. You manage a small smile when the woman beside you offers you a slice of quince jelly. It jiggles menacingly. You accept it anyway. Now for a fringe fact. Some especially extravagant lords would assign a taster to each high-ranking guest. Yep. A poor soul whose whole job was to eat a bite of each dish first to check for poison. How often did they die? Not often, but the drama was always implied. Historians still debate whether this was for safety or just another intimidation tactic. Eat up, dear. Guest and know that death is only one bite away. A crash interrupts your thoughts. A page boy has dropped a tray near the bishop's feet. The clatter echoes like a thunderclap. The bishop lifts an eyebrow so slow and deliberate, it could qualify as a sermon. The page stammers, drops to one knee, and begins apologizing in a dialect you didn't know existed. The bishop waves him off with the grace of a man who's seen 10 feasts and 5 actual wars. The hall breathes again. The food keeps coming. A trencher piled with lark tongues and pine nuts. A dish of pickled onions wrapped in cabbage leaves. A roast venison joint so glazed it reflects the ceiling like a meat mirror. Someone passes around a pot of thick green sauce. Parsley, garlic, vinegar, mystery. It tastes like a punch to the tongue. A good one. The conversation at your table is cautious at first, then grows louder with each course. Someone mentions taxes. Another laughs about a sheep that ran through market day wearing a bonnet. Then someone starts talking about who's marrying whom, and suddenly 3 people lean in at once. Even small talk here is strategic. Gossip is currency. "Did you hear about Lord Hamley's daughter?" one woman whispers. "They say she refused to marry the merchant's son and ran off with a falconer." "Not a falconer," someone else corrects. "A Fletcher." Entirely different birds. You file that away. Might be useful. Then there's the laughter. High, forced, often delayed by 2 seconds as people calculate if they're allowed to find it funny yet. Someone snorts. Someone pretends they didn't. The social navigation is so delicate it could snap like sugar glass. Another musical interlude begins, this time a soft harp, plucked in gentle arcs that glide under the talk and clatter. The player's fingers move like wind through wheat. For a moment, even the gossip quiets. It's a beautiful, unexpected, a rare breath in the middle of this controlled chaos. You sip your mead and watch the hall ripple with movement. Servants darting between tables, skirts brushing past benches, hands reaching, pulling, passing, cutting, wiping. The entire room is alive, pulsing with ritual, and every moment reinforces the same truth. This is not just a meal. This is hierarchy in motion, power played out with gravy. As the fourth course rolls in, you realize you've lost track of time. And space and calories. A servant offers you something on a skewer that might be heart, or gizzard, or the world's angriest mushroom. You take it anyway. You're committed now. By the time the wine goblets are refilled and another toast rises from the dais, you find yourself raising your own without thinking. The bench beneath you creaks, the candles flicker, and somehow you feel like you belong here. Just don't try to sit near the salt. Your stomach is already negotiating surrender terms, but the real feast hasn't even started. What's been happening so far? That's just the prelude, the social ceremony, the political ballet. Now comes the food in earnest. Course after course, a parade of excess dressed in spice and smoke. A bell chimes, just a small one, rung by a boy standing near the high table. That's the official cue. It means silence, attention, and finally, permission to eat without restraint. You glance around. Everyone freezes for just a beat, then begins to eat with synchronized intensity, as if they've been holding their breath for hours. Servants sweep through the hall like choreographed ghosts, each bearing trays that shimmer with glaze, garnishes, and the unmistakable smell of something fried in animal fat. The first main dish lands in front of the high table with a soft thump. A whole roasted heron, wings spread, its beak painted gold. You're not entirely sure if it's meant to be eaten or admired. Either way, the bishop looks at it with suspicion, and someone mutters something about too much symbolism. Below the salt, you're given a more modest dish. Rabbit in ale-braised onions, served on a slice of trencher bread so soaked it now counts as soup. You dig in. It's rich, gamey, a bit chewy, but full of spice. You recognize black pepper, cloves, and maybe cinnamon. Medieval cuisine loves spice like modern Instagram loves filters. On everything. Sometimes to disguise the age of the ingredients, sometimes just to show off. There's a rhythm to the banquet now. Serve, eat, clear, serve again. One dish after another rolls out, and each one is a lesson in either excess or creativity, or both. You try a slice of quince and rosewater tart that's somehow more floral than dessert, and then immediately chase it with a bite of lamprey pie that tastes like salty regret and iron. You don't ask questions. Here's something to chew on, literally and metaphorically. A good number of the recipes being served tonight come from cookbooks written not for common folks, but for noble kitchens. One of the most famous? The Form of Curry, commissioned by Richard II's court. It includes everything from swan in sauce to hedgehog made from pork and shaped with almond quills. You glance at a platter of something spiky. Yep, probably that. Across the table, the merchant you've unofficially bonded with tries to eat a glazed eel by spearing it with his knife. It slips, lands on his sleeve. You both pretend it didn't happen. That's banquet etiquette. The food is layered like social armor. Thick sauces over tender meats, fruit and meat and pies, pies under sauces. You bite into a chicken leg and hit a cluster of grapes. You blink, you chew, you accept. It's honestly not bad. Then comes the fish course. Not just a fish course, the fish course. Because in a banquet of this scale, even if it's not Friday or a holy day, you still get one. A massive pike is paraded down the hall on a wooden plank, mouth stuffed with rosemary and cloves, its scales painted with edible silver leaf. It smells like the sea and a perfume shop had a fight. Historians still argue about the origin of this everything must look insane trend. Some believe it came from Moorish Spain. Others blame Italian Renaissance courts. Wherever it started, by the 14th century, England and France were locked in an edible arms race. If your neighbor roasted a peacock, you gilded yours. If they served sugar castles, you added battlements and possibly pyrotechnics. Suddenly, someone at the high table stands, a woman in a crimson gown, heavy with embroidery. She raises a goblet. The room hushes. She launches into a toast, her voice clear and trained. It's a mixture of praise for the host, veiled mockery of an absent cousin, and something poetic about the nobility of roast boar. You catch about half of it, and it ends in laughter, polite applause, and someone near you muttering, "She used that line last year." A servant arrives with a bowl of something. It jiggles. You brace yourself. It's blancmange, a dish that has nothing to do with the modern idea of a pudding. This is a chicken and rice mush, flavored with almond milk and sweetened with sugar and rose water. It looks like it was pre-chewed by angels. You try a bite. It's weirdly comforting. And yet, with every dish that lands, there's an unspoken awareness. This isn't just food. It's messaging. The spices, imported, expensive, a sign of reach and wealth. The meat, fresh, varied, and cooked for hours by a kitchen staff large enough to form a football team. Even the vegetables are dressed in a way that says, we can make cabbage taste like court intrigue. Fringe tidbit time. One popular dish served tonight is cockentrice, a Frankenstein's monster of cuisine. Half piglet, half capon, sewn together, roasted whole. It's meant to impress and disturb. Yours arrives already carved, but you can still see the line where feathered met fur. Charming. At some point, a dish of green cheese makes the rounds. It's soft, spreadable, and made from curds. No mold here, just herbs, maybe parsley or mint, giving it a fresh, almost grassy tang. You spread it on stale bread and wonder if this is the last normal thing you'll eat all night. Then come the subtleties. Not subtle as in mild, but subtleties, the medieval showstopper dishes. Elaborate constructions made to resemble things they aren't. One is a marzipan ship with sugar sails, floating on a tray of dyed blue jelly. Another is a meat pie that opens to reveal little pastry musicians playing trumpets made of sugar. One even sings. Badly. You blink. Did that pie just wink at you? At some point, you lose track of courses. You count 6, maybe 7. Someone says this is only the second remove. You look down at your trenchers, which are now soggy puddles of wine, broth, and gravy. A server comes by and removes the trencher, replacing it with another slice of hardened bread. You nod, dazed. Your merchant friend has abandoned dignity and is openly gnawing on a mutton chop. A few others follow suit. The rules bend with each goblet of mead. Nobles laugh louder. A knight removes his boots. You try not to breathe too deeply near him, and still, more food. Pigeons stuffed with breadcrumbs and herbs. Honey-roasted figs. Sausages and mustard sauce. You are either in heaven or very, very close to needing a lie down. By the time the next platter arrives, quails roasted in almond milk, you no longer resist. You simply accept the new reality. You live here now, in this endless cascade of meats and sauces and marzipan castles, and you will never be hungry or upright again. The feasting isn't over, not by a long shot, but your belt is starting to feel philosophical. By now, your fingers are shiny with grease, your trencher's been replaced twice, and there's a suspicious smudge of honey on your sleeve that you definitely didn't authorize. Still, you're hanging in there, though mostly by sheer will and a refusal to embarrass yourself in front of the knight across the table who keeps nodding approvingly every time you finish a plate. But something begins to dawn on you. Where are the forks? You glance around. Knives? Everywhere. Personal ones mostly, pulled from sheaths at belts like culinary swords. Spoons? In use, sure. Mostly for pottage, stews, or chasing down runaway peas. Fingers? Absolutely. But forks? Like proper, pronged, food-stabbing forks? Absent. It's not just you, it's everyone. And here's your history bite of the day. Forks did exist in medieval Europe, but people didn't trust them. In fact, when they first showed up, probably imported from the Byzantine Empire, they were seen as foreign, frivolous, and vaguely sinful. God gave us fingers, muttered one 11th century clergyman. So why defy his will with devil's tines? So you eat like the rest of them. Fingers, knives, bread as scoop. You tear at meat, pinch off soft cheese with thumb and forefinger, and learn to hold your goblet steady with your non-sticky hand. And honestly, it's kind of freeing. Messy, yes, but honest. Like medieval tapas, minus the napkins and with slightly more poultry fat. Some nobles, especially at the high table, attempt grace. You see a woman delicately slice a sliver of goose, dab it into a golden sauce, and place it on her trencher with the composure of a saint. Then you watch a man beside her reach for the same sauce and accidentally knock the entire dish into her lap. No one says a word. He quietly refills her goblet. She stares straight ahead like her dress isn't soaked in cinnamon vinegar. There's a rhythm to it all, though. Food arrives, hands reach. Bits are carved, shared, stolen, dropped, retrieved. Some guests wear napkins tucked into collars. Others use tablecloth corners, sleeves, or if they're bold, the person next to them. At your end of the table, the etiquette is looser. Someone hands you a plum soaked in wine. You bite. It explodes. You're now lightly marinated. A boy across from you laughs so hard he chokes on a walnut. His neighbor slaps him on the back and steals the last bite from his plate while he's recovering. Fair game. Fringe tidbit? There were manuals on table manners, like John Russell's The Boke of Nurture, which literally instructed young nobles on how to behave while dining. Gems include, don't pick your teeth with your knife, don't wipe your fingers on the tablecloth, use your neighbor's tunic, okay, not really, and always wash your hands before and after the meal, especially if you've been near dogs, horses, or commoners. You notice that hand washing is, in fact, a thing. Every so often, servants come down the rows with basins of scented water, pouring it over guests' hands while another holds a towel. The water smells faintly of herbs, maybe lavender or thyme. It's a moment of calm amid the chaos. You dip your hands, rub, pat dry. The merchant beside you uses the towel to also polish his goblet. Multitasking. Back at the high table, the display continues. One noble carefully peels a fig with his knife, arranges the slices like flower petals on his trencher, and sprinkles them with crushed almonds. You blink. You just swallowed half a pheasant leg in 3 bites. Who's the real winner here? Hard to say. A knight 2 seats down is carving up something that might be goose liver, possibly served with apple slices. He offers some to the woman beside him. She declines with a look that suggests she once lost a duel to a goose. The knight shrugs and eats both portions. The sounds around you are a mix of scraping knives, chewing, laughter, burps politely disguised as coughs, and the occasional clang of dropped cutlery. It's not quiet, but it's cozy. You're part of something now. Sticky, smoky, slightly wine-sloshed, but real. Then there's the issue of serving yourself. You don't. Not really. Dishes are placed on the table, yes, but it's considered rude to reach too far. Instead, you wait for the dish to come to you or someone to offer it. Some tables pass things around. Others have a designated server, usually the lowest-ranked noble or a page, who makes sure everyone gets at least a bite. You're somewhere in between, so you do a bit of both. Accept what's past, gesture politely for seconds, and pretend you didn't just take the last candied walnut. A bowl of fermenti shows up next. It's wheat boiled in milk, sometimes broth, sweetened with honey, and thick enough to mortar a castle wall. You poke it with a spoon, it jiggles. You take a bite. It's surprisingly nice. Comforting, like medieval oatmeal, but with more calories and possibly the ability to stop time. And now for the most humble MVP of the table, the trencher. It's not a plate, it's bread. Stale, round, thick-cut bread, usually from yesterday or the day before. You eat off it, it soaks everything. Some folks nibble it during the meal. Others leave it to soak up flavor and then pass it to the poor at the end of the night. A few bold diners carve symbols into theirs, stars, family crests, fish, to mark it as claimed. You start carving your initials with a chicken bone. It feels right. You wipe your fingers again, this time on a small square of cloth provided by the steward. It's thin, rough, but better than your tunic. You realize that while most people here have adapted to the finger food lifestyle, everyone has their own little coping method. Some use spoons for everything. Others stab food with knives and lift it like a skewer. One guy is eating soup directly from the bowl like it's a mug of ale. No shame. You reach for another goblet, mead this time, warm, spiced, thick with honey and herbs, and settle back. The candlelight flickers, your fingers glisten, your belt sighs. You, dear listener, have fully entered the eating with your hands and not caring who sees phase of the feast. You're sticky. You're slightly wine-drowsy, and you're finally blending in. Medieval etiquette is weird. It's layered, rule-bound, full of unspoken codes and dramatic table drama. But it's also honest. Raw. Community by necessity. You might not be friends with everyone at this table. You might not like half of them. But you've all touched the same goose with your fingers, and now? You're family. Just don't reach for the last bite without asking. That's how duels start. By now, the feast has settled into a full-blown spectacle. You're leaning back slightly, fingers half curled around a goblet of mead, trying to decide if the ache in your stomach is fullness or fear. Either way, it's not the food that's commanding attention now. It's the entertainment. And if you thought the dishes were dramatic, oh, friend, the entertainers are on a whole other level. It starts subtly enough. A juggler enters balancing 3 apples while walking a tight line between 2 benches. He's grinning, teeth chipped, tunic patched in 100 places, and somehow radiating both danger and charm. A soft gasp ripples down the hall as he swaps an apple for a flaming torch. You sit up straighter. Then he swaps that for a knife. And then a second one. This man is juggling fire and blades on your dinner table. Welcome to medieval banquet entertainment. Equal parts performance art and potential workplace hazard. When the juggler finally bows, applause echoes from both ends of the hall, except from the bishop, who looks unimpressed and possibly terrified. One of the knives landed about 6 inches from his foot. The juggler is escorted out with a wink and a roasted chestnut he probably pocketed from the high table. Immediately after, 2 acrobats, twins by the look of them, spring forward into a routine that defies both gravity and ankle integrity. They leap, spin, and tumble down the narrow space between trestle tables, narrowly avoiding platters and goblets. Someone starts clapping in rhythm. A lady drops her knife. No one retrieves it. Everyone's too mesmerized, and then, because, of course, the bard arrives. He's tall, dramatic, with a feather in his cap that's so large it might qualify as its own bird. He plucks at a lute and launches into a song about a knight, a stolen chicken, and a curse that backfires into unexpected romance. It's catchy. Rhyming. You catch a few lines that definitely toe the line of what's polite, but the nobles are loving it. Here's your quirky tidbit. A lot of medieval jesters weren't just court clowns. Many were licensed fools. employed full-time by noble houses with permission to say things no one else could get away with. Their job? Make people laugh, yes, but also jab at power, mock hypocrisy, and serve truth beneath layers of absurdity. And sometimes, they were terrifying. Case in point, the next act. He's short, bald, covered in bells. His eyes twinkle with mischief and mild danger. He announces himself with a trumpet made from an animal horn, and then launches into a monologue about fleas, royalty, and flatulence so vivid that several people across the table choke on their pudding. You're howling. Quietly, inside, because decorum. Then, plot twist, the jester turns serious. With a few solemn chords on a lyre, he begins to recite a slow, haunting poem about winter, hunger, and a widow's last loaf of bread. The hall goes quiet. Someone sniffles. You get goosebumps. And just like that, he's gone. Vanished behind a curtain. You blink. Was he even real? Entertainment at these feasts wasn't just about filling the gaps between courses. It was part of the ritual. A banquet was a tapestry. Food, sound, light, movement, emotion. And every performer was a thread meant to weave the whole night together. There were mummers who performed silent plays with masks and gestures so exaggerated they bordered on demonic. There were dancers, fire breathers, musicians with recorders, drums, bagpipes, and instruments that looked like IKEA furniture with strings. And sometimes, there were animals. You flinch as two boys enter the hall holding a leash. On the other end, a goat, with a tiny hat. Someone explains it's part of a farce, a short comedic skit about a farmer, his wife, and a goat that thinks it's the Pope. You don't follow the plot, but the goat does climb a bench and eat someone's pie, so... Standing ovation. Fringe fact time. There's actual evidence that performing animals were part of royal banquets. Bears, trained dogs, monkeys in tiny outfits. Yes, even then people were stuffing animals into costumes and calling it a show. Historians still argue whether these were part of scheduled entertainment or just someone's terrible impulse control on display. Back to the hall, a man with a parrot walks by, announcing riddles. The bird shouts the answers before he finishes the question. It's unsettling. You make a mental note to never trust a bird with better comic timing than you. In between acts, music never really stops. The minstrels shift tones depending on the course. Soft harp for stews, pipes, and drums for meat. Something vaguely chaotic for the sweets. You begin to realize the entire thing is paced like a theater production, complete with set changes and intermissions. And now, dessert. And with it, the final performance. The lights, red candles, dim slightly. Servants clear the main dishes. From the far end of the hall, a cart is wheeled in, covered in a golden cloth. You hear whispers. Someone says, "It's the sugar beast." You don't know what that means. Then the cloth is lifted. It's a dragon, made of sugar paste painted with edible dyes, wings spread, smoke puffing from its nostrils. Thank you, incense. With ruby candies for eyes and a tail made of licorice ropes. It's not life-sized, but it is big enough to cause serious confusion in the dark. The dragon is sliced by the host, revealing a center of fig and nut paste. The crowd cheers. Goblets are raised. You're handed a piece of its wing, which tastes like honey and almond and victory. You lean back once more, dazed. Here's your reality check. This level of entertainment didn't happen every week. It was reserved for major occasions, royal visits, weddings, treaties, or moments where a noble needed to remind everyone just how deep their coin purse went. Still, even lesser feasts had music, storytelling, maybe a juggler who also cleaned up after himself. Tonight, though, this is the full show. And as the final note of a flute drifts through the smoky air, you realize something strange. The entertainment hasn't distracted from the meal. It's enhanced it. You'll remember the boar's head, yes, but you'll also remember the goat in a hat, the jester's poem, the sugar dragon's licorice tail. you'll remember the feeling of being part of something utterly absurd and yet deeply human. Because even in a world of rigid rank and roasting swans, laughter still rules the room. You're beginning to feel like a bottle left uncorked for too long. Open, warm, slightly fizzy in the brain. The food has slowed, the music has dulled your edges, and the room is wobbling just a little too gently to be completely stable. But now comes the quiet danger of any medieval feast. The beverages. No one here is drinking water. That's adorable. This is the Middle Ages. Water is for peasants, livestock, and praying you don't die from dysentery. Inside the hall, the liquid of choice is fermented, fortified, and frequent. A server tops off your goblet with something golden. It smells like a mixture of honey and what you imagine an orchard might taste like after a thunderstorm. Mead. It's sweet, thick, slightly herbal, and goes down far too easily. You blink, your fingers feel fuzzy, and here's your first proper fact of the evening. Medieval folks didn't avoid water just because of disease, though, yes, contaminated rivers were a frequent flyer on the How I Died This Century list. They also genuinely believed that beer, wine, and mead were more nutritious, energizing, and suitable for digestion. And honestly, after a mouthful of warm ale with hints of clove and barley, you kind of see their point. The table next to you is passing around a pitcher of red wine that could probably polish armor. It's been mulled with spices, nutmeg, cinnamon, dried orange peel, and served just above room temperature. You take a sip and feel it travel down your spine like a warm memory of mistakes. Wine was considered the drink of the upper class. The nobility imported it from Gascony, Burgundy, even Italy if they were really flexing. Beer, that was for the masses, though don't confuse it with today's laggers. Medieval beer was usually unfiltered, cloudy, and often flavored with herbs like yarrow or bog myrtle. Sometimes hops, sometimes not. Depends on the year, and whether the brewer liked you. Your benchmate, who now smells faintly of onions and joy, hands you a goblet of ale. It's thick, yeasty, has the texture of wet bread but somehow tastes like wood smoke and victory. You raise it. He toasts you with a grin and immediately drops his spoon into his lap. You both pretend it's part of the tradition. Another fringe curiosity, hypocras, a sweetened, spiced wine served especially at the end of meals. Usually crimson in color, it was believed to aid digestion and make guests more conversational. It's served here in long-necked bottles with little silver cups. You try it. It tastes like mulled wine fell asleep in a spice rack and woke up married to sugar. It's divine. Dangerous. You want more. But then comes the curveball. A server sets down a jug and declares proudly, "Posset." Everyone nearby cheers. You're not so sure. Posset is a medieval beverage made of curdled milk, ale, honey, and spices. It's thick like a warm milkshake with trust issues. You sip. You nod. You internally gag. Still, you finish it. Because you're part of this now, and pride is stronger than taste buds. Somewhere near the high table, a man is slumped against a pillar, gently snoring with a goblet still upright in his hand. No one moves him. He's earned it. Now, not everyone's downing booze like it's a national sport. Clergy, especially stricter orders, often stuck to small beer, a weak, watered-down brew with barely enough alcohol to qualify as tipsy. Children drank it too. Not because medieval parents were irresponsible, but because even they knew that untreated well water could lead to an early grave. You watch as a small boy with a mop of curls and a tunic 3 sizes too big drinks from a goblet that likely contains ale with less kick than apple juice. He gulps it down, then chases a chicken through the hall. Balance. Historians still argue whether most medieval people were in a state of constant mild intoxication. Was everyone just a little tipsy all the time? Or did their bodies adapt to lower alcohol concentrations and higher consumption rates? Hard to say, but tonight, judging by the slow swaying and increasing laughter, you're leaning toward yes. And here comes the mead again. This one's different, infused with herbs. You taste lavender, maybe thyme. It's floral, strange, and oddly calming. A bard nearby is playing a soft tune on a flute, and you're pretty sure he's improvising the notes just to match the way your thoughts are unraveling. Your fingertips are a little numb. Your smile is too easy. The candle flames are starting to blur slightly around the edges like they're dancing just for you. And honestly, you don't mind. You sip again. The warmth spreads. And now, as if summoned by the atmosphere, the drinking games begin. A man in a tunic embroidered with tiny birds challenges another to a round of rhymes. They take turns improvising couplets until someone either swears, repeats, or collapses. You watch for 3 rounds before someone accidentally rhymes pottage with cabbage and is booed into silence. Another group is playing hand slap, a game where one person tries to slap the back of the other's hands before they're pulled away. It ends with someone knocking over a jug of ale and shouting, "That's treason!" No one disagrees. The bishop hiccups. At your own table, the merchant beside you starts retelling the story of how he once smuggled saffron in a hollow walking stick. His voice is too loud. His eyes twinkle. You suspect most of the story is fiction? You let him finish anyway. It ends with a punchline involving a goose and a customs officer that makes everyone howl. A soft belch echoes down the hall. It's followed by applause. You're not sure who started that trend, but now everyone's doing it. And just when you think the mead has claimed you completely, a fresh pitcher arrives. Clear liquid this time, with floating herbs and a smell that hints at danger. Aquaviti, the water of life. Basically, proto-whiskey. Strong, fiery, capable of setting your soul on fire. You take one sip and immediately grow chest hair. It's time to slow down. The music softens again. The candles flicker lower, and a hush starts to spread. Not all at once, but gradually as bellies fill and heads grow heavy. Some guests lean against the walls, others stretch out on benches. One noble lady is curled up with a hound the size of a small donkey. No one questions it. You rest your goblet gently on the table, fingers sticky with honey, eyes half-lidded. The laughter is still rising and falling, but softer now. More spaced out, less performative. Even the jester has stopped juggling soup spoons and is now just whistling through his teeth. The drink has done its job, not to numb but to warm, to soften, to open up space for stories, songs, and the kind of slurred confessions that may or may not be remembered by morning. You feel it too. That mellow thrum, that deep, ancient warmth that comes from drinking something old, in a room filled with light, music, and the smell of roast duck. And maybe, just maybe, you understand why they did this. Why they poured and passed and toasted and drank, not just for taste, but for togetherness. Because here, in this flickering moment, everyone belongs, even the goat. The room quiets for just a heartbeat, just long enough for someone to whisper, "Wait, isn't today a fast day?" And just like that, it's as if the whole feast collectively coughs and glances sideways. Welcome to one of the strangest paradoxes of the medieval banquet, fasting days. But make it fabulous. You blink through the candlelight and wine haze. Surely this can't be a fast day. You just watched a pie explode into live birds, someone roasted a swan, and you're 80% sure the last thing you ate used to be a porpoise. But technically, yes, it's Lent. Or Friday, or the eve of a saint's feast. And that means no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no animal fat. Unless it's technically not meat. Here's the historical twist. Medieval fasting wasn't about eating less, it was about eating differently. And people got extremely creative with the loopholes, like spiritually inventive. Entire cookbooks were written with fasting alternatives that stretched the definition of meatless to its breaking point. And tonight, you're about to taste the results. A servant places a bowl in front of you. It's creamy, aromatic, and bubbling at the edges. Fish stew, maybe? Wrong. It's almond milk pottage, made with crushed almonds boiled and thickened until it resembles dairy. It tastes oddly comforting, like warm porridge that forgot its own recipe halfway through. Another dish lands. It looks like roast chicken. Smells a little like fish. Turns out it's pike molded into the shape of a capon, reassembled with breading and spices to fool both the tongue and the priest. You take a bite. It flakes like cod, but has the seasoning of rotisserie. You nod, defeated. The illusion is flawless, and then, brace yourself, comes the beaver tail. Yes, beaver tail. Because, and this is 100% true, medieval scholars and theologians at one point classified beavers as fish on the grounds that they swam and their tails were scaly. So during Lent, it was totally fine, nay, righteous, to roast a beaver tail and call it seafood. Yours has been grilled with garlic and rosemary. It's leathery, fatty, and tastes somewhere between duck and wet bark. You chew slowly. You're not sure if you're sinning or innovating. Historians still argue whether this was blind faith or brilliant adaptation. Was the church turning a blind eye to keep people happy? Or was this the ultimate medieval version of life finds a way? Either way, the feast continues with an endless lineup of not meat dishes that are anything but humble. You're handed a tart filled with what looks like meat, but the server whispers it's a mixture of eel, almonds, raisins, and rice, bound together with saffron. It's rich, textured, and delicious. If you hadn't been told it was meatless, you'd never know. Then there's mock eggs, small balls of almond paste and sugar, shaped like yolks and whites, dyed with saffron and parsley, served in actual eggshells for full deception. It's dessert masquerading as breakfast in a feast disguised as a fast. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve. Again, etiquette has fully given up at this point. Down the row, a nobleman is explaining that barnacle geese are totally acceptable on fasting days. Why? Because in some regions it was believed they hatched from driftwood or grew on trees near the sea, and therefore didn't count as land animals. You chuckle. He's serious. His goblet sloshes dangerously as he cites St. Bernard with the confidence of someone 3 pints deep in theological denial. And here's another quirk. Since dairy was banned, every creamy sauce you've eaten so much you might technically be classified as a fortified structure. And yet, curiosity gets the better of you. You ease yourself from the bench, a process that now involves minor negotiations with your knees, and drift toward the source of this madness, the kitchen. Behind a thick wooden door, down a narrow stone corridor, and past a tapestry that smells suspiciously like fish stew, you find it. The heart of the feast, the dragon's belly, the glorious smoke-choked chaos of a medieval kitchen in full tilt. It hits you immediately, heat, noise, and the heady tang of everything cooking at once. Boiling, roasting, sizzling, and smoking. You're sweating instantly, but so is everyone else. A cook waves a ladle at you to move. A scullery boy runs past, balancing 2 baskets of onions like his life depends on it. It might. The floor is a mess of footprints, spilled flour, chopped herbs, and the occasional chicken feather. Somewhere in the far corner, something is on fire and no one seems concerned. This is not your modern chef's polished domain. This is culinary warfare, and it's magnificent. A massive hearth dominates the wall, filled with spits turning slowly on iron rods. Boars, chickens, capons, maybe even a suspiciously quiet goat, all rotate in perfect, greasy rhythm. The meat hisses as fat drips into the fire, and the scent alone could start a rebellion. Now for your history fix. Medieval kitchens weren't just single rooms. In wealthy households or castles, they were often sprawling complexes with separate stations. Boiling houses, pastry rooms, larders, spice chambers. Each had its own crew, its own tools, and its own secrets. You're standing in the hot kitchen now, the loud, smoky, panicked core of it all. To your right, a man is kneading a massive pile of dough. His hands are dusted with flour, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, and he's humming a tune that keeps pace with his movements. Nearby, another cook is stirring a cauldron so large you could probably bathe in it. Inside, barley, leeks, venison scraps, and a handful of green things you can't identify. He adds a pinch of something from a pouch, tastes it with a wooden spoon, nods. Perfection. A plucked goose is being stuffed with cloves, dates, and breadcrumbs. A duck is being sewn inside a pig. And next to it, a girl no older than 10 is painstakingly lining a pie shell with strips of eel in a spiral pattern, like she's drawing with fish. You stare. She doesn't look up. This is just another Tuesday for her. Fringe tidbit? There were hierarchies even in the kitchen. The master cook was a powerful figure, half manager, half artist. Beneath him were layers. Sauciers, pastry cooks, scullions, and the lowliest of all, the spit turners, often young boys who worked in shifts to keep the meat moving. There was even a job title for the person who kept the fire alive. Turnbroche. Hot, thankless, and very flammable. A loud clang makes you jump. Someone's dropped a pan. No one even turns around. Another cook grabs the pan, slaps the offending scullion on the back of the head, and keeps stirring. You move deeper in, past the boiling pots into the cooler larder room. Here, slabs of meat hang on hooks. Eels slither in barrels of brine. Herbs, dried and fresh, hang from rafters like medieval streamers. Rosemary, thyme, sage, mint. You see cloves, cinnamon sticks, sacks of ginger. Imported. Expensive. Stored like treasure. A woman is slicing pears with terrifying precision. She arranges them on a tray, sprinkles them with sugar, and hands it off without missing a beat. She mutters a prayer under her breath. For speed? For flavor? Unclear. Then there's the pastry room. You weren't ready. The air here is different. Cooler, sweeter, and thick with flour dust. A pastry cook is carving little leaves into the top of a pie crust. Another is using a metal stamp to punch stars into a marzipan rose. This isn't just food, it's art, edible, temporary, but still art. And while all this is happening, there's yelling, constant yelling. Orders, corrections, swears that haven't been invented yet. Instructions shouted across smoke and fire. It's a symphony of chaos conducted by the head cook, whose face is red, hands are blistered, and who looks more like a general than a chef. Historians still argue whether the kitchen staff in major houses were seen as artisans or servants. Probably both. Their work was critical. Their failures? Public. And when you realize that every dish served out there had to be carried out hot, intact, and in perfect timing, you want to clap for them. Or cry for them. Or both. A commotion at the door. A servant barges in looking frantic. Lord Renwick's trout is under-seasoned, he cries. There is a moment of silence. Then all hell breaks loose. 3 cooks converge on a tray. One adds vinegar. Another grabs a handful of parsley. A third pours wine directly into the serving bowl and swirls it with a spoon. It's not subtle, it's alchemy. The tray is returned. The crisis is over. The feast continues. No one will ever know, except you. You saw everything. And somewhere in the madness, a cat leaps onto a cutting board and begins licking a honey-glazed carrot. A kitchen boy tries to shoo it off. The cat slaps him in the face. The cook nods. Let her have it, he says. She earned it. You step back toward the exit. The door swings open and you're hit once again by the cooler air of the hall. The heat loosens from your bones. The noise dims. But your head is full now with smells, sounds, grease, and an overwhelming respect for the miracle that is a medieval kitchen functioning under pressure. You re-enter the hall, changed. Behind every pie you've eaten, every bite of gilded bird or jellied eel, there were 20 people sweating in a fire-lit dungeon of culinary madness. And honestly, you owe them one. Maybe not your life, but at least your evening. By now, the line between banquet and battlefield is starting to blur. The food has slowed to a trickle. Desserts have come and gone in waves of sugar, almond paste, and soft sighs. The meat sweats are real. The air is warm, spiced, and heavy with the scent of extinguished candles, sweet wine, and the faint tang of sweat-soaked velvet. But what fills the room now isn't plates. It's sound. The music is louder. Where once there were gentle lutes and harp flourishes, now there are drums. Big ones. Thudding like heartbeats. A fiddler near the high table has taken his tempo from pleasant court ballad to summon the wild fae, and no one told the lute player to stop. The two melodies are fighting. Loudly, it's glorious. A group of guests rise unsteadily to their feet and begin a carol. A circle dance, hands linked, feet shuffling in rhythm, more ceremonial than skillful. They twirl and sway, robes trailing like sleepy tornadoes, and someone sings around over the music, mostly in tune. A nobleman trips on his own spurs and lands in a rush pile. Cheers erupt, no injuries. He bows theatrically and is handed another cup of wine. Welcome to Post-Feast Entertainment, Medieval Edition. Here's the thing. The farther into the evening it gets, the less it's about etiquette and hierarchy. The rules loosen. The chairs creak. Even the tapestries seem to relax a little. And if the feast was all about order, the aftermath is about release. A servant brings out what appears to be a drum, fashioned from a wine barrel and some leather. He joins the fiddler. The rhythm picks up. It's primal, contagious. The bishop clears his throat disapprovingly, but even his foot taps slightly under the table. Then someone sings a drinking song. Loudly, off-key, with confidence that can only come from mead and poor judgment. The lyrics involve a goose, a barmaid, and a misunderstanding about a pair of gloves. By the second verse, half the hall is singing along, and you are trying not to choke on laughter. A woman 3 seats down is weeping with laughter into her sleeve. Her husband pats her head like a cat. He's definitely wearing his dinner napkin as a crown. Let's pause here for your historical snack. Feasts in the late medieval period often ended with dancing, music, or competitive boasting matches called flighting. Think of them as lyrical duels where nobles would insult each other in rhyme and try not to accidentally start a war. Historians still debate how seriously these were taken. Some turned into duels, others turned into marriages. It was a slippery slope. And speaking of slippery, someone just attempted a backflip in full chainmail. He made it halfway. Everyone applauds anyway. The atmosphere now is loose and laughing, but not lawless. There are still lines, unspoken ones. You don't touch the high table, you don't spill on the lady with the blue brocade. You don't ever make eye contact with the host's falcon, who is now perched on a column and definitely judging everyone. Fringe fact. It wasn't unusual for nobles to bring their falcons indoors. Why? Because nothing says status like a bird trained to attack on command. Plus, they kept down the rats. Probably. Back at your table, someone produces dice. Real bone dice, smoothed from use. A few coins and trinkets hit the wood. Someone bets a ring. Another throws in a prayer bead. The game begins. You don't know the rules, but everyone's laughing and accusing each other of cheating, so you assume it's going well. Meanwhile, a man in a fox fur hat stands and starts reciting a riddle. You think it involves a tree, a nun, and a loaf of rye bread. No one guesses it. He reveals the answer. It makes no sense. Everyone claps. The dancing resumes, more vigorous now. A younger knight twirls a lady in green so hard her headdress flies off and lands in a cup of ale. She shrieks, slaps his arm playfully, and proceeds to wring the ale out into his boots. Love, medieval style. A few servants join the dance circle. No one minds. At this point, the class boundaries have blurred enough that as long as you're not on the table, you're probably safe. And then, someone is on the table. Not dancing, just asleep. A monk, to be specific. Curled up beside a bowl of dried fruit, snoring softly with one sandal dangling off his foot. Someone drapes a napkin over him. The party flows around his sleeping form like water around a rock. The music reaches a fever pitch. Fiddle, drum, flute, clapping, stomping. You're not sure how many songs have passed. Time has softened into something malty and musical. Someone hands you a tambourine. You shake it. You feel powerful. You are tambourine royalty. Then a brawl breaks out. Okay, not a real brawl. A wine-fueled scuffle between two squires arguing over whose horse can outrun the other in a thunderstorm. It escalates from words to a playful shove to someone falling into a barrel of pickled onions. A third squire tries to help and also falls in. The barrel tips. Everyone roars with laughter. Crisis averted. Nobody got stabbed. You begin to notice people drifting into little clusters. Gossip groups, whispers and giggles, flirtations blooming like yeast in a warm loaf. A cluster of older knights play chess on a board scratched into the table with a dagger. Their pieces are buttons, bones, and a boiled egg. Someone begins singing a love ballad that starts sincerely, then devolves into a dramatic monologue about unrequited love and poor shoe craftsmanship. It's unclear if it's a metaphor. You're invested. Your merchant friend has fashioned a crown out of roasted leeks. He places it on your head. You accept your fate. You are the Lord of Leeks now. All must bow. And then, just as you think the room couldn't hold another drop of sound or motion, it begins to slow. Not all at once, but you feel it. The music softens. The circle dance falters. Someone stretches with a long sigh. Another leans against a pillar and closes their eyes. The laughter doesn't stop, but it lowers to a simmer. The feast has turned the corner from riotous to restful, from revelry to reflection. You sit back, tambourine in lap, and watch as the flames in the sconces burn lower, casting gold into the corners of the ancient hall. Shadows stretch. Smiles linger. The musicians pluck one last tune. Soft, sweet, almost lullaby-like. Someone hums along. Just like that, the after-feast slips into something gentler. Like the moment before sleep. Like a breath held. Like a story waiting to be told in the morning. If the banquet was a test of endurance, and the dancing was a temporary detour into chaos, then this is the part that lingers. You've entered the golden hour of the feast, the gossip and games phase. No food, no formality. Just people, wine, and the unfiltered honesty of a full belly and a slightly pickled brain. The hall has mellowed. Some guests are beginning to drift toward the walls, curling into cloaks, sinking into cushioned benches, or perching on stairwells like sleepy cats. But others? They lean in closer, eyes sharp, voices lowered. It's time to talk. You shift on your bench, your goblet still half full, and listen. To your left, a pair of minor nobles, sisters by the look of them, are whispering about who arrived wearing last year's surcoat. You'd think he'd at least let it out at the sides, one murmurs. He looked like a stuffed goose. The other nods solemnly, then immediately bursts into silent laughter. Gossip is currency here. Not just for fun, but for strategy. These aren't idle rumors, they're careful observations, subtle maneuvering, real-time political chess played with raised eyebrows and shared glances. A noble near the fire claims Lord Everin's eldest son is being courted by the widow of a spice merchant. A spice merchant! And 3 people gasp so sharply you think someone's inhaled a bay leaf. She's clever, someone says. Clever's worse than pretty. You nod like you understand, even though you're pretty sure being clever and pretty just makes you a demigod. At another table, a monk is in deep conversation with a merchant's wife, speaking softly about property lines, inheritance loopholes, and the strange disappearance of a certain border stone. It's not flirtation, it's medieval tax evasion in action. And then the games begin. not the boisterous dice rolling of earlier. These are slower, more cerebral. A chessboard appears, hand-carved, worn smooth by time and arguments. The pieces are heavy in the hand. The bishop figure actually is a bishop. Tiny, grim-faced, leaning slightly like he's had too much hippocras. A squire and a knight begin to play, but the real action is around them. Onlookers commenting, suggesting moves, making wagers. One man loses his leather belt in a bet and shrugs like it's nothing. "Wasn't holding my britches up anyway," he says. Nobody argues. In a corner, a group begins a game of tables. A backgammon-like pastime played with fierce intensity and an almost religious focus. The stakes? Dried figs and the last sliver of quince paste. You wander over and offer a silent nod of approval when someone rolls double sixes and shouts, "God wills it!" Fringe detail for the win. Medieval noblemen and women were often taught games not just for pleasure but to develop skills. Chess for strategy, dice for probability. Even riddles and rhyming games were encouraged. They showed wit, memory, and mental agility. In a world where court politics could kill you, being entertaining and clever was survival. You notice the host now, still upright, still talking softly to guests near the high table. But his armor of authority has loosened. His shoes are off, his sleeves are rolled, he's laughing, genuinely. This isn't performance. This is winding down. One lady produces a box of carved wooden tokens, inscribed with odd phrases and symbols. "Truth or forfeit," she declares. Everyone nearby groans in delight. The game begins. She pulls a token. "Tell us what you most regret." A knight looks around, then leans in. "I once kissed a baker's wife and got caught in a flour barrel." Laughter. Another token. "Name the one you would marry if you had no title." A silence. Then someone gestures to the goat. "That one." She listens. Uproar. Not all the games are polite. One involves guessing who's stolen an object from the table. A guest reaches under the cloth and produces a silver spoon. Gasps, then accusations. "You? No, you?" It ends with everyone holding spoons above their heads, laughing like children who've outwitted bedtime. You glance up. The tapestries are glowing in the firelight. The shadows on the stone walls are longer now, softer. They lean like old memories. The bard returns, not to sing this time, but to tell a story. No music, just words. It's about a king who forgets his name, a beggar who speaks in riddles, and a feast that lasts until the stars fall out of the sky. You don't know where the story begins or ends, but everyone listens. Even the goat seems interested. You're not sure when you started reclining more than sitting. Your hand is still loosely curled around your goblet, though the wine has warmed and gone still. You watch two servants play a hand-slapping game near the door, their giggles like birdsong. One last piece of gossip drifts past your ears, something about a secret marriage, a coded letter, and a noblewoman who always wears gloves, even to bed. "She has a birthmark shaped like a fleur-de-lis," someone whispers. You don't ask how they know. Historians still argue whether these after-banquet moments were essential or indulgent. But you know this. They're real. In a world of rigid rules and curated appearances, this low candlelight, half-whispered truths, and laughter thick as honey, is where people let themselves be. The feast is over. The spectacle is past, but the conversations, they'll echo for weeks. You weren't planning to sleep here, no one was. And yet, here you are, still in the hall, the feast long since faded, your boots kicked half off, and your back leaning against a pillar worn smooth by centuries of other backs. Other feasts, other guests who also didn't make it home. Welcome to the accidental medieval sleepover. Around you, the hall looks like the aftermath of a small war, but a warm, heavily perfumed, roast chicken-scented war. Candles are burning low, puddling wax onto silver holders. The rushes on the floor are crushed flat, mixed with breadcrumbs, orange peels, lost earrings, and maybe one abandoned eel pie. Every bench is occupied, some by people, others by cloaks, goblets, or sleeping dogs. You pull your cloak tighter and settle in. You hear the soft sound of someone snoring. Not gentle snoring, nightly snoring, loud, proud. The kind that could be weaponized. Somewhere near the fireplace, two guards are propped up against their spears, heads tilted back, mouths open like gargoyles mid-yawn. You didn't plan to stay, but getting home is out of the question. The drawbridge was raised hours ago, and even if it weren't, you're not navigating moonlit mud roads while full of mead and almond paste dragon. This was part of the culture, in fact. Feasts often went so late and guests came from so far that sleeping in the hall wasn't uncommon. If you were lucky, you got a bench. If not, the floor. If really unlucky, you curled up near the door and woke up with someone else's foot in your ribs. You shift a little. Your shoulder finds a softer patch of stone. Not bad. To your left, someone mutters in their sleep about taxes and not the swan again. You feel that. A dog pads quietly through the hall, sniffing at scraps, occasionally pausing to nuzzle a hand or nap near a warm human. It finds a cozy spot beside you and flops down with a contented sigh. Congratulations! You've been adopted. Your cloak smells like mead and rosemary and... Is that burnt sugar? You don't mind. The weight of it is comforting. The air is cooler now, the fire's burning down to coals, the earlier heat of the hall replaced by a softness that wraps itself around the edges of your brain. Fringe tidbit for your sleepy mind. Some great halls were designed with sleeping alcoves built into the architecture. Little windowless nooks where honored guests could curl up without being stepped on. But for the rest, the banquet benches doubled as beds. If it was winter, you might get a woolen blanket. If it was summer, your only protection was your own breath, and the vague hope that Sir What's-His-Name didn't sleepwalk with a sword. Across the room, the goat, yes, she's still here, is curled up on someone's cloak, her tiny bell removed, finally silent. She opens one eye, sees no threat, returns to sleep. You hear someone quietly humming, an old lullaby perhaps, or a song from earlier in the evening, now slowed to something half-remembered. It drifts up to the rafters, mingling with the smoke and the dreams. Someone shuffles past looking for an empty corner. They find one. Collapse with a grunt. The sound of leather creaking joins the choir of night noises. You notice the firelight flickering across the faces of the sleeping. For a moment you think of the banquet as a painting, an illuminated manuscript scene frozen in amber. The highborn and lowborn sleeping side by side. The knight who once toasted with gusto now curled up like a child. The noblewoman with her head resting on her servant's shoulder. All the roles dropped, at least until sunrise. Historians still debate whether these communal sleepovers blurred the lines of class or reinforced them. After all, the high table was still the softest. But here now, with everyone half asleep and tangled in cloaks, it feels equal, or at least shared. The embers pop softly. You think of the kitchen, now quiet, of the pastry cook snoring in the flower room, of the steward finally unrolling his list and crossing out the last dish, smiling into the candlelight. A servant walks through the hall, barefoot, gentle. She tucks a linen over a sleeping child, adjusts a goblet that nearly tips, douses a candle. The night tends to itself. You settle deeper. Your belly is full. Your hands are still sticky with sugar. Your ears hum with half music. And your dreams are circling now, slow and syrupy. You'll wake with a crick in your neck, sure. Maybe a stranger's boot near your head. Maybe a chicken watching you with judgment. But right now, you're safe. You're warm, and you're not alone. The morning doesn't arrive. It seeps in. Slow, gray, and a little embarrassed about showing up after all that. There's no trumpeting dawn, no angelic choirs, just the quiet creak of old wood, the soft clink of goblets being gathered, and the unmistakable sound of someone muttering, "Where are my shoes?" You blink awake. You're still on the bench, the same one. Your cloak is half draped over your head. A A half-eaten turnip is resting near your elbow like some edible guardian spirit. Your back feels like you slept in a cathedral bell. Congratulations! You survived your first medieval feast sleepover. The fires burned low to soft orange coals. Smoke curls lazily toward the rafters. Light trickles through high windows like it's trying not to disturb anyone. It catches in floating motes of flour dust, candle ash, and maybe a few breadcrumbs that will never be swept up. Around you, others stir. One knight wakes with a start, clanging slightly as his chainmail shifts and muttering something about flaming ducks. A noblewoman rubs her eyes, adjusts her veil, and quickly tries to locate her dignity somewhere beneath a wrinkled velvet cloak. There's a general air of quiet regret and mild confusion. Your merchant friend, who, if you recall, crowned you the Lord of Leeks, has a beet stuck to the back of his tunic and no idea how it got there. He groans softly, reaches for a goblet, realizes it's empty, and sighs like a man who's seen too much. And then, slowly the servants appear. They're quieter now, gentler, with soft steps and respectful murmurs. This is not the grand entrance of a feast. This is the hush of the hangover shift. And yes, even in the 14th century, people got hangovers. The only difference? They're remedies. You're handed a warm cup of something thin, brothy, and vaguely green. It smells like onions, vinegar, and determination. You take a sip. It punches you in the throat, then pats you on the back. You don't know if it's a cure or a punishment. A steward walks past, murmuring something about pickled cabbage water with mustard and crushed garlic. Someone retches gently in the corner. A servant places a tray nearby. Stale bread soaked in wine and herbs meant to balance the humors. Another offers a spoonful of honey with a sprig of mint, allegedly to calm the bile. You wonder which bile specifically they mean. Fringe fact? Hangover cures in the medieval world were a strange, ambitious cocktail of superstition and trial by herb. Some recommended drinking more wine to drive, out the old, which is horrifying. Others swore by things like ground pearls, powdered staghorn, or drinking from a silver cup engraved with religious verses. Historians still argue whether these were treatments, or just desperation made ritual. Someone near the fire is attempting to comb his hair using a fork. He gives up halfway through and decides the disheveled look is now fashionable. The bard, yes, he slept here too, is sprawled under a table wrapped in a curtain. He sits up, blinks, pulls a fig from his sleeve, and eats it like this is the most normal start to any day. You manage to stand, stretch, and immediately regret both. Every muscle in your body reports in with a dull, throbbing medieval accent. You shuffle to the basin near the wall and splash cold water on your face. A sharp inhale. You're alive. Slightly salted, but alive. And now, the cleanup begins. The servants move with quiet efficiency. Dishes are gathered, crumbs swept, wine stains patted out of tablecloths using secrets passed down from grandmother to granddaughter. Benches are righted, goblets are stacked. A dog is gently nudged off a table with more politeness than you've seen all night. You notice the steward again, his hair slightly askew, his list from yesterday now scribbled with check marks and mysterious red ink. He looks tired, proud, haunted. Probably already planning the next one. The kitchen wakes up too. You hear faint clatter, the groan of a heavy pot being lifted, the familiar hiss of fire being coaxed back to life. Today it will make pottage. Hearty, simple, and apologetic food. No peacocks, no pies with live birds. Just lentils and leeks and a promise that everything will calm down now. You sit down with a bowl of it. It's warm. Bland in the best way. Your stomach thanks you. The ghost of last night's eel pie loosens its grip. Around you, guests prepare to leave. Some slip out quietly, cloaks drawn, boots squelching softly in the early mist. Others linger, say goodbye, share final chuckles and whispered regrets. One knight asks if anyone saw his glove. Someone hands him a turnip. He accepts it. You notice the goat is gone. Someone finally took her home. Or maybe she was home all along. Medieval goats are like that. You glance at the high table. The host is still there, sipping something pale and steaming, flanked by yawning pages and a clerk who already looks knee-deep in parchment. He catches your eye. Nods. You nod back. No words. Just mutual understanding. You both survived. The tapestries seem duller in the daylight. Less enchanted, more thread. The hall, now almost clean, feels different. Like a place that briefly became something more than itself. A stage? A sanctuary? A riot. And now it returns to stone and rushes, waiting for the next feast, the next fire, the next round of songs and secrets. You rise. Your cloak is wrinkled. Your tunic has wine stains. Your boots don't match anymore. But your heart is full. And your memory is stuffed with roast rhymes and rhythms that will echo in your head long after this place disappears into history. As you step out of the hall, the cool morning air greets you like an old friend, with a slap to the cheeks and the promise of clarity. The castle walls stretch above you. Quiet now, their stone faces no longer lit by firelight, but by the pale blush of dawn. You take a deep breath. It smells like damp earth, wet hay, and distant chimney smoke. And under it all, a lingering note of roast goose and clove, like the feast itself is still exhaling. The drawbridge, which seemed such a distant rumor last night, now creaks slowly downward. You join a trickle of guests heading out. Yawning knights, disheveled ladies, cooks ferrying baskets back toward the kitchen. A juggler walks past you juggling nothing. Just ghost motions. His hands remember more than he does. And then there's you. Boots scuffed. Cloak crooked. Fingers still faintly sticky from almond paste and laughter. You feel like you've stepped off a stage, like you were part of a play too rich to remember clearly, but too vivid to ever forget. You pass a stable boy singing a ballad under his breath. The same one from last night. The rhythm catches in your steps. You smile. A cart rolls by loaded with empty wine jugs and bread crates. Behind it, a servant scratches a tally into a wooden plank. Not a record of costs. A storyboard of abundance. The walls of the hall don't seem so imposing now. You've seen behind the curtain, heard the mutterings of the kitchen, felt the pulse of the room when a sugar dragon took flight. And you know what that means. It means you were part of it. You lived a full arc of medieval spectacle. From the nervous arrival, through the sensory explosion of the feast, down into the sticky-fingered chaos of post-dinner antics, and now, into the hush that follows. Fringe tidbit. Some guests, especially those of high status, were sent off with parting gifts. Leftover sweets, herbs, even embroidered napkins. A token of goodwill, a bribe to return. You glance down. Someone's tucked a candied quince into your pouch. You don't remember it happening, you don't question it. You pass the outer gate. The world outside feels sharper, flatter. No minstrels, no pies shaped like hedgehogs. Just birdsong and hoofbeats and the slow churn of carts in the mud. You glance back once. The castle watches. Silent. Full. Waiting for its next chapter. But you? You carry the last one now. In your belly, your bones, your breath. You are the chapter. And as you walk, each step steadier than the last, you find yourself humming. Not a song, not quite. A memory, in rhythm, a story shaped like a banquet. That began with fire and ends with footsteps fading into morning. The path beneath your feet smooths into silence. Your boots no longer squelch. The mud dries. The wind stills. Even the birds seem to pause between songs, as if waiting for you to exhale fully. You feel the weight of the feast settle, not as heaviness, but as warmth. Not just the food or the fire or the mead, but the closeness. The way laughter filled the rafters like smoke. The way stories clung to the tapestries. the way strangers became something softer than strangers. The medieval world may seem distant, wrapped in myths and shadows, but tonight, you walked in it, sat at its table, slept in its hall. You saw how hunger was more than food. It was for spectacle, for power, for connection. And for a moment, you were there, fingers sticky, heart full, watching dancers whirl beneath candlelight. Now, as the scene fades, let your mind go quiet. Let the echoes soften. You don't need to remember every dish, every laugh, every rhyme. Just hold on to the feeling of warmth, of story, of having been somewhere strange and beautiful. You're safe now. The hall is behind you. The night is folded away. Let the rhythm of breath carry you. Let the last embers go cold. And sleep. Softly. Sweet dreams.